She knew his name, she knew his secret, and before he could ask how, she vanished. The neon lights of Mel's diner flickered in the quiet of the midnight streets. Nestled between old bookstores and pawn shops, it was the kind of place forgotten by time, a relic of the past in a city that never stopped moving forward. Ethan Harrington, a billionaire whose name was synonymous with power, control, and ruthless business acumen, found solace in its unremarkable atmosphere. Here, there were no corporate sharks, no sycophants vying for his attention, no multi-million-dollar deals waiting to be signed. Just the hum of an old jukebox, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and a waitress who seemed far too observant for someone earning tips at a place barely making rent. Her name was Mia. She wasn't particularly remarkable at first glance. Mid-20s, auburn hair tied back in a lazy ponytail, and sharp green eyes that seemed to see right through a person. She had a way of speaking that made Ethan feel as if she knew more than she should, yet she never pried into his life. She simply served him black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just the way he liked it, along with casual conversation that somehow never felt forced. For the past 6 months, he had been stopping by Mel's diner every couple of nights, always at the same time, always at the same booth. It had become a ritual, but tonight something was different. Mia was already at his table before he even sat down, the coffee cup steaming as if she had anticipated his arrival to the second. Ethan smirked. "Guess I'm predictable," he mused, taking his seat. Mia didn't return the smile. Instead, she studied him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "That depends," she said. "Would you like to know something unpredictable?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Try me." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just above a whisper. "Your best friend is going to betray you." Ethan's hand froze around the coffee cup. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the old clock behind the counter. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Then he chuckled. "That's a hell of a conversation starter. What are you, a fortune teller?" Mia didn't laugh. She simply stirred a spoon absent-mindedly in an empty cup, her gaze unwavering. "I don't need to be," she said. "I just know things." Ethan's smile faltered. There was something in her tone, an eerie certainty, an unshakable confidence. It wasn't a warning born out of assumption. It was a statement of fact. His mind immediately went to Daniel Crawford, his business partner of over 15 years. They had built Harrington Crawford Enterprises from the ground up. They had shared triumphs, failures, and more late-night whiskey-fueled strategy sessions than he could count. If there was one person in the world Ethan could trust, it was Daniel. And yet, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't even know me. How the hell would you know anything about my life?" Mia tilted her head, as if considering whether to answer. Then she simply said, "I know more than you think, and I know you don't want to hear it, but you need to. Watch your back, Ethan." His name. She had never once called him by his first name before. Ethan stiffened, the faintest shiver running down his spine. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low. Mia just smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She stood up, collected his empty plate, and walked away as if nothing had happened. Ethan sat there for a long time, the coffee in his cup growing cold. For the first time in years, a seed of paranoia took root in his mind. Ethan Harrington wasn't the type to believe in coincidences. The moment he left Mel's diner that night, Mia's warning echoed in his head like a siren he couldn't silence. "Your best friend will betray you." He told himself it was absurd. Daniel Crawford wasn't just his business partner. He was practically family. They had built Harrington Crawford Enterprises from scratch, weathering market crashes, hostile takeovers, and scandals together. If there was one person Ethan trusted with his life, it was Daniel. And yet, the way Mia had said it, the way she knew his name when he had never told her, the certainty in her voice, it gnawed at him. Ethan pushed the thought aside, at least until a week later. It started with something small, a minor discrepancy in the company's financial reports. Ethan had always prided himself on keeping a tight grip on every aspect of his empire. He wasn't a CEO who blindly signed off on paperwork. He read everything. The numbers didn't add up. At first it seemed insignificant. A few missing transactions, a subtle misalignment in the books. But when Ethan asked the finance department for a full audit of all offshore accounts, his request was delayed. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. So, he went digging on his own. The discovery. Sitting in his penthouse office late at night, the glow of his laptop illuminated the glass of whiskey beside him. Ethan hacked into encrypted company records, a skill he had kept sharp from his early days when they had to outsmart bigger corporations just to survive. What he found made his blood run cold, millions of dollars siphoned away. It wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. The money had been funneled into multiple shell corporations over the past 6 months, all leading to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And the authorization? Daniel Crawford. Ethan clenched his jaw, his grip on the whiskey glass tightening until his knuckles turned white. The man he had trusted more than anyone had been stealing from him. But why? And how had Mia known before he did? The first confrontation. Ethan called Daniel the next morning, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk. My office, 1 hour." Daniel arrived, his usual charm intact. "What's the urgency, partner?" Ethan slid a printed report across the desk. Daniel barely glanced at it before giving a casual laugh. "You're having me audited now? Come on, Ethan. This is probably a clerical error." But Ethan wasn't smiling. He leaned forward, voice razor sharp. 6 months. 6 months, Daniel. This isn't a damn clerical error." Daniel's expression flickered. Just for a second? But Ethan caught it, a crack in the facade. "Ethan, listen." "No." Ethan's voice cut through the room. "You listen. You're my business partner, my best friend, and yet you're robbing me blind. So tell me why I shouldn't have you arrested right now?" A slow smirk crept onto Daniel's face. "Because," he said smoothly, "if you do, you'll lose everything." Ethan stilled. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exuding calm confidence. "I knew you'd find out eventually. You're sharp, Ethan, but you're also predictable. That's why I've already covered my tracks. Any move you make against me will backfire." Ethan's mind raced. Could it be true? Could Daniel have set him up even further? Before he could react, Daniel stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "I'd think carefully before making me your enemy, Ethan." Then he walked out. Ethan sat there, his entire world spinning. Mia's warning hadn't just been right. She had known before it even happened. The disappearance, Ethan barely slept that night. The next morning, he had only one place to go, Mel's Diner. He walked in, scanning the room. The old jukebox hummed in the background. The usual patrons sipped their coffee, but Mia was gone. He approached the counter, his pulse quickening. "Where's Mia?" he asked the older waitress at the register. She frowned. "Who?" "Mia, the waitress with auburn hair. She's been working here for months." The woman's face twisted in confusion. "Sweetheart, we don't have a Mia working here." Ethan's stomach dropped. "No, you do. I talk to her all the time. She serves me my coffee every night." The waitress shook her head. "I've been working here for 15 years, hun. I know everyone on staff. You must be mistaken." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't possible. He had spoken to her. He had sat in this very booth. She had called him by his name, and yet, no records, no proof, no trace. Mia didn't exist. A chill ran through him. Who the hell was she? And how did she know about Daniel before he did? Ethan Harrington didn't like mysteries, especially when he was the one caught in the middle of them. His entire life had been built on logic, strategy, and calculated risks. He didn't believe in ghosts, psychics, or fate. But now he was faced with something he couldn't explain. Mia, the waitress who had warned him, didn't exist. He had returned to Mel's Diner 3 more times since that morning, asking different employees about her. Nobody remembered her. No records, no paychecks, no employment history. It was as if she had never been there at all. And yet, Ethan knew she was real. He had spoken to her, argued with her, seen the sharp intelligence in her green eyes. She had known his name, known about Daniel, known too much. So where the hell had she gone? Digging for answers. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who left things unresolved. If Mia was real, he would find her. If she wasn't, then someone had gone through an extraordinary effort to make her disappear. And that meant there was more to the story. He started with the most obvious approach, security footage. He had his team pull up weeks' worth of footage from inside Mel's Diner. If Mia had worked there, she would be on camera. But when he watched the recordings, his stomach twisted. Mia wasn't in a single frame. Every time he should have seen her, walking past the counter, taking his order, handing him his coffee, the footage showed nothing. It was as if he had been sitting alone the entire time. Ethan rewound and watched again, this time watching himself. There he was, sitting at his usual booth, talking, reacting, gesturing to someone who wasn't there. It was the most unsettling thing he had ever seen. Ethan slammed his laptop shut, his pulse hammering in his ears. He had two possibilities. One, he was losing his mind. Two, someone had erased her from existence, and he didn't like either option. The man with no face. That night, Ethan sat in his penthouse office, whiskey in hand, staring out at the city skyline. His thoughts raced. Mia had warned him before he even knew Daniel was betraying him. That meant she had inside information, or she had been watching him for a long time. Either way, she wasn't just a waitress. His phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number? You're asking too many questions. Drop it. Ethan's grip tightened around his glass. Someone knew he was looking for Mia. Instead of replying, he traced the number's location through his private servers. The signal bounced through multiple relays, but eventually, he got a hit. An address in the industrial district, a warehouse. If someone was trying to scare him off, they had chosen the wrong man to intimidate. A dangerous revelation. Ethan arrived at the warehouse alone. The air smelled like rust and oil. He stepped inside cautiously, every muscle in his body tense. The place was empty, except for a single chair in the center of the room. On it, an envelope with his name scrawled across the front. He picked it up, ripped it open, and pulled out a single photograph. It was him and Mia, sitting together at Mel's diner. Except there was something terribly wrong with the image. Mia's face was blurred out, completely unrecognizable, as if someone had erased her identity from the world. Beneath the photo was a note. Stop searching. She was never meant to be found. Ethan's breath came in sharp, measured exhales. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a mistake. Someone was covering up her existence. But why? And more importantly, who the hell was Mia? Ethan Harrington wasn't one to back down. Someone had erased Mia from existence, but he refused to let them succeed. The photograph with her face blurred out wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. Someone wanted him to stop looking. That meant they were afraid of what he might find. And fear was something Ethan knew how to exploit. Setting the trap. Ethan returned to Harrington Crawford Enterprises, his company, acting as if nothing had changed. If Daniel was truly the mastermind behind the betrayal, then Ethan had to play his cards right. He devised a fake investment opportunity, a high-risk, high-reward deal in Dubai that promised billions in return. Ethan planted the information carefully, knowing that Daniel wouldn't be able to resist. If Daniel was stealing, he'd try to siphon money from this deal too, and Ethan would be watching. Sure enough, 48 hours later, a large sum of money was quietly funneled into a shell company Ethan had created as bait. Caught. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Daniel had betrayed him, but he wasn't working alone. The scale of the cover-up around Mia meant bigger forces were in play. Someone in the shadows had been pulling the strings long before Ethan even realized he was a pawn. The ambush Ethan sent Daniel a simple message. Meet me at the penthouse. We need to talk. The moment Daniel walked into Ethan's penthouse, he didn't see the whiskey bottle thrown at his head until it was too late. It smashed against the wall behind him, shards flying everywhere. What the hell, Ethan? Daniel snapped, ducking instinctively. Ethan was already moving toward him, grabbing Daniel by the collar and slamming him against the glass window. 6 months, Ethan growled. 6 months you've been robbing me blind, and you were arrogant enough to think I wouldn't find out? Daniel smirked, unfazed. You finally figured it out? Took you long enough. Ethan tightened his grip. Who else is involved? Who made Mia disappear? At the mention of her name, something flickered across Daniel's face. Recognition and fear. Ah, Daniel said, voice low. So you found out about her. Ethan's stomach tightened. Who is she? Daniel just chuckled. She was your one advantage, Ethan. Too bad she's gone now. Ethan's jaw clenched. I'm not playing games, Daniel. Who is she? Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You don't get it. You were never supposed to meet her. Ethan's pulse quickened. What the hell does that mean? Daniel smirked, pushing Ethan's hands away. He wasn't afraid anymore, which meant he knew something Ethan didn't. It means, Daniel said, that you weren't the one being watched. Ethan stilled. What? Daniel took a step back, straightening his suit. You were never the target, Ethan. She was. The realization. The weight of the words hit like a sledgehammer. Mia hadn't been protecting him. She had been running, and whoever had erased her, they were still out there. Ethan's mind raced. Was she still alive, or had he just led her enemies right to her? Daniel adjusted his cuffs, his confidence unwavering. You should have listened when they told you to stop searching. Now, it's too late. Ethan's eyes burned with rage. No, he said coldly. I don't think it is. Because Ethan had spent his entire life winning impossible battles, and he wasn't about to lose this one. Mia was still out there, and Ethan was going to find her, no matter the cost. Ethan Harrington had spent his entire life building an empire. He had outmaneuvered competitors, crushed hostile takeovers, and survived scandals that would have destroyed lesser men. But none of it compared to this moment. Mia wasn't the one watching him. She was the one being hunted, and now, because of his recklessness, he had put her in even greater danger. There was only one move left to play. The next hunt begins. Ethan didn't waste time. He turned every resource he had toward finding Mia. He hacked into global surveillance networks, tracing her last known whereabouts. He called in favors from intelligence contacts, spooks who owed him for past investments in black-budget projects. He used his own security teams, scouring financial records, searching for hidden offshore accounts that could point to someone protecting her or chasing her. But every lead went cold. Whoever had erased Mia had done it thoroughly. They weren't just covering tracks. They were making sure no one would ever find her again. The breakthrough. Then, a breakthrough. One of Ethan's cyber teams intercepted an encrypted transmission sent to a private offshore account linked to Daniel. The message was chilling in its simplicity. The target has resurfaced. Proceed with termination. Ethan's pulse pounded. Mia was alive. And someone had just given the order to kill her. The message contained geolocation metadata. A single pinpointed location. An abandoned train station on the outskirts of the city. It was a trap. Ethan knew that. But he didn't care. The showdown. Ethan arrived at the station just before midnight. The place was a relic of a forgotten era. Rusted tracks, shattered windows, and a cold wind whispering through the emptiness. His instincts screamed danger. He stepped onto the main platform. The old overhead lights flickered. Then a voice cut through the silence. I told you to stop searching. Ethan turned. A man in a gray suit stood at the far end of the platform. He was calm, composed, exuding the quiet authority of someone used to pulling strings behind the curtain. Ethan had dealt with men like him before, powerful, untouchable, a puppeteer operating in the shadows. Where is she? Ethan demanded. The man smiled as if amused. She was supposed to stay hidden. You made sure that didn't happen. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. If you hurt her... The man raised a hand, cutting him off. This isn't about revenge, Mr. Harrington. This is about balance. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Who the hell are you? The man's smile remained. We're the ones who make sure people like you don't upset the natural order. Ethan processed the words. Not a competitor, not a criminal. Something bigger. Whoever these people were, they weren't just after Mia. They were controlling who gets to exist and who doesn't. Ethan reached for his gun, and then the lights cut out. Mia's return gunfire erupted in the darkness. Ethan dove behind a pillar, bullets whizzing past. The air filled with the sharp scent of burning gunpowder. Then, a scream. A struggle. The emergency lights flickered back on. The man in the gray suit was on his knees, a gun pressed against the back of his head. And behind him, gripping the weapon with steady hands, Mia. She was bruised, her clothes torn, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Hey, Ethan, she said, breathless. Took you long enough. Ethan stared at her, stunned. You're alive, Mia smirked. Barely. She nudged the man with the gun. But I found us some answers. Ethan stepped closer, looking down at the man who had tried to erase her. Start talking. The man spat blood onto the floor, glaring at Mia. You think you can stop this? You think you can run? Ethan grabbed the man by his collar, his voice deadly calm. I don't think I know. The final choice. The man laughed weakly. If you let me go, I'll disappear. You'll never hear from us again. Ethan glanced at Mia. She met his gaze, and for the first time since this all started, he saw something he hadn't before. Fear, not for herself, for him. Ethan, she said softly, these people, they don't lose, they don't forgive. If we let him live, he'll come back. Ethan didn't hesitate. One clean shot. The man in the gray suit slumped forward, lifeless. Mia exhaled slowly. Well, that's one way to end things. Ethan holstered his gun. It's not over, Mia nodded, but at least now we're not running blind. They stood there for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Then Mia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, battered notebook. This is what they were trying to erase, she said. It has everything, names, operations, proof. Ethan took the notebook, flipping through its pages. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. Epilogue. A new war. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, staring out at the city. He had spent his whole life fighting for his company, his empire, but now he was fighting for something far more dangerous. Mia sat across from him, drinking coffee like she had never been gone. So, she said, what's next? Ethan closed the notebook. We burned them to the ground. Mia grinned. That's what I like to hear. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Final message. Sometimes survival isn't about being the strongest or the richest. It's about knowing when to stop playing by the rules, because the real game is being played in the dark.